Hello again and welcome to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, July 14th, 2016. A happy Bastille Day to all our French viewers out there. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio, coming off perhaps the most newsworthy week in the history of this great sport. So needless to say, if you've been watching this show for the last couple of years, you know that's a very strong statement. We have a lot to talk about this week, so let's get right into it. That, of course, Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. That is the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post. And that is the Colombian kid, Danny Segura of MMAfighting.com. Guys, great to be here. Wow, so much to discuss. Arguably, the biggest news story of all our careers happened Monday morning, right? As far as MMA is concerned, early Monday morning, it was officially announced that the UFC has been sold to WME/IMG. A couple other partners involved, but that's the main one. And since then, not a whole lot of news. Everyone's been relatively quiet. We've had now a few days to digest this, and I want to start with the number. I want to start with the $4 billion number. Now that you've had time to really take this in, are you surprised that in 2016 the UFC has been sold for $4 billion?
I am. It was a little bit higher than I thought it was going to be. There was an article in Bloomberg, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, and they were saying that when Fitch and Quarry and all those guys filed the lawsuit against Zuffa, or UFC, whatever one is the specific designation, that they had valued it at half of that. And you have to imagine that the plaintiffs in a potential lawsuit who are trying to elicit money are going to be generous with how they value an organization, and even they came up considerably short. I don't know if you want to get to the Real Madrid thing or not.
Well, we will get into that.
Okay, so I'll save that for a little later. But I guess to say, look, we often talk about fighter worth, fighter contracts. What can you get someone to pay you? That's how much you're worth. What can you negotiate? There's no such thing as objective worth. It's only what you can find in a negotiating room. And boy, did they hammer out quite a generous deal.
What do you think?
Well, forever we've heard Dana White and people within the UFC, as well as other media people, ourselves included, and fans talk about MMA, when's it going to become mainstream? When's it going to be part of the sports mainstream? Well, when you're sold for $4 billion, you are part of the sports mainstream. That right there signifies it. It was all over the news. It was all over all of the major media outlets. And it wasn't simply because a bunch of guys fighting in a cage had their organization sold. It was because it was sold for that amount of money. And I think that is the biggest takeaway I got from it, that it was not just surprising, but it also was kind of I don't know, vindicating isn't exactly the right word, but it kind of supports that theory that the UFC has built itself up to something spectacular.
I don't know about you though, I like to watch how the mainstream reacts to the sport, and a lot of the reactions that I saw were, wow, we didn't realize the UFC was this popular. Like, it seemed like these people were surprised as well. Not so much saying like, hey, good for these guys. They were also kind of a little bit surprised that the UFC was sold for $4 billion.
But that's what happens when you are kind of on the outside looking in, and then all of a sudden people realize, wait a minute, they're not on the outside, they're on the inside.
I know this is putting you on the spot, Danny, but, and I know all the financials aren't public. It's impossible for us to truly say. It is possible, and I'm told that you have to multiply the numbers by 7, and there's all kinds of algorithms involved. But when you consider the fact that the UFC is essentially the dominant brand in mixed martial arts, it's a worldwide brand. It is home to the best fighters in the world. It has this incredibly large roster talent pool. Can you see why it would be worth that much when you consider the reach that it has, the power that it has, and perhaps the room to grow? Is it not all that crazy?
I mean, it's still surprising. $4 billion is a lot of money, but I mean, basically they sold an entire sport.
Right.
Because we're talking about the best fighters, the biggest events. It all happens in the UFC. So yeah, this is a big sale, but there's so much, room to grow because the UFC is technically, the sport.
So when I took this in on Monday, to me, the first takeaway was, well, these fighters are worth a hell of a lot more than we all thought they were. They're a lot more underpaid than we thought they were. Now, we all knew that was somewhat of the case. This has been talked about for quite some time. We didn't need this sale to make that revelation. But if someone is looking at the UFC and the brand of the UFC, what is it? It's a collection of fighters. It's not, people aren't walking around, they want you to, but no one's really walking around with a UFC hat, a UFC t-shirt, things like that. People are buying UFC 200 because Brock Lesnar, Daniel Cormier, Anderson Silva, Miesha Tate are involved. If UFC 200 was headlined by John Lineker versus Michael McDonald, it wouldn't have been as big as it was. So at the end of the day, the UFC may be a brand, yes, but it really is a collection of fighters. And if the fighters aren't there, if there's serious injuries, if there's a downturn as far as talent is concerned, if there's a shortage of talent, to me the value goes down. So I can't
Sort of.
How not?
Think of it this way, right? Like, okay, so my favorite team, the only team that matters in the world is Real Madrid.
Sure,
right?
That is a brand.
That is a brand, right?
If they have the worst players in the world, that brand means a lot.
Do they?
Yes.
It still means a lot. It doesn't mean what it doesn't rate what it gets at 3.7 billion. Part of why Real Madrid is Real Madrid is they have Cristiano Ronaldo. They have James Rodriguez. They have Luka Modric. They have Toni Kroos. They have Karim Benzema.
But it's also because of who they had.
Right, but
there's a history
here's
there.
the point. If something befell them, if FIFA said you can no longer transfer, you have to sell your star players for these sanctions, I'm just hypothesizing. Real Madrid still would mean something because Real Madrid itself, the identity, the brand, the logo, that's all been invested in itself the last century, really. However, its value would decline if they lost the Ronaldos and everyone else. It would substantively be less than what it is. So what you're saying is people bought 200 because it was Lesnar versus Lineker, which I wouldn't disagree with. However,
Lesnar versus Hunt.
I'm saying if it had been, you're saying if Lineker had headlined, it would have been the same.
Sure.
Yeah, I certainly who could disagree. But I guess the point being is when you ask what's the value of the UFC, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that one, they're buying that Cowboys name, they're buying that Real Madrid name, and more than that, it's a digital media company. The amount of assets that company produces is astounding. So not all of it very good, quite honestly. Looking for a fight, but you get the idea. Like they still put out a tremendous amount. They see themselves as a media company that also puts on fights.
Well, it's obviously going to go up and down, but look at the top teams on that Forbes list that came out today. Forbes came out with a list of the richest franchise in the world, sports franchises in the world. Number one, Dallas Cowboys.
Which hurts my soul in a number of ways.
Okay, but the Dallas Cowboys are not a successful brand right now.
Dallas Cowboys have not won a Super Bowl in this century.
That's my point.
This entire century.
The New York Knicks are in that. They're the laughingstock. The Lakers are in the top 5. They suck as well. So obviously it's going to go up and down, but at the end of the day, young kids are wearing Lakers jerseys in Los Angeles. Young kids are wearing New York Knicks jerseys. People aren't doing that for the UFC. They will never do that for the UFC. This is a cage fighting brand. So to me, if you see those numbers and then you just try to compare it to the number that the UFC sold for, it kind of blows my mind.
It blows my mind too. But we will have to remember that not too long ago, before Conor McGregor was a huge star, before Ronda Rousey was a huge star, the big star in the UFC for so many years was Dana White. He was the guy who was at every single press conference, every event. He was the guy that anybody that thought UFC, the first name that came up with was Dana White. Not Chuck Liddell, not Randy Couture. Those guys were stars inside the cage, but Dana was the kind of the face of it. Less so now, very much less so now. But he helped build that brand. He helped make it into a brand, and to some extent, people would pay attention to fights because they're UFC fights, regardless of who's involved. I mean, we've talked about this. I know we've had a lot of debates on this show about back when there was too much expansion, too many fight cards and bad fight cards. Well, it's because people will watch that stuff regardless, even if there isn't some huge star on the card.
I'm not sure I see your point, to be honest, because Dana White built it into a brand. I'm not disputing the fact that it's a brand. What I'm wondering is, did they overvalue the brand?
Yeah, I think they overvalue the brand, but I'm with you. I'm with Jeff a little bit more on this one, which is to say, is the relationship between, okay, let's use your New York Knicks, is the relationship between, if Porzingis leaves the Knicks brand is not going to decline. The Knicks have their own brand identity and equity and visibility that supersedes that in ways that the relationship to Porzingis is not so strong. To your point, if you lost Lesnar and Rousey and McGregor and they all went to Bellator, this would substantively alter the landscape. They have different relationships, but they're different in degree, not kind. The UFC is more dependent on their stars than the Knicks are dependent on Porzingis or Rose, but nevertheless, there is that. It's the power that you yield or wield, I should say, when you purchase the UFC is, yes, the fighters and that roster, and that's a massive component, but so is that brand identity, so is the digital assets, so is their existing deals all over the world. It's all of these things you're building. Is that $4 billion? I don't know, but again, if you can get someone to pay for it, well, there you go. It's $4 billion.
I think the other astounding thing about this price tag is that everything involving the UFC up to this point has been pretty much shrouded in mystery. We've always talked about how the UFC does not announce its pay-per-view numbers. Yep. We get good reports from Dave Meltzer here at MMA Fighting, and some other folks will report this or that from a financial perspective. But for the most part, it's been it's been reports that's there's shadowy stuff. Now we have something that's substantive. We know exactly what it's worth, and I think what's going to be huge for that is that now the fighters who've always felt like they were underpaid, now they know. They have a target. They can say, okay, that's the amount of money this company's worth. This is the amount of money that we collectively earn. It's a paltry amount compared to, think about the amount that goes into salaries in the NBA or the NFL or Major League Baseball, and compare that to the amount that goes into salaries in this sport, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think we saw that on Twitter. I mean, all the fighters that were reacting on it were talking about their salary and saying, how they should be compensated a lot more, knowing that the UFC is worth $4 billion.
Yeah, well, let's see how many of those do something about it, right? It's one thing to tweet about it. It's harder to actually do something. And what can they do is the question. You bring up a great point, though, because very smart people obviously looked into buying the UFC, right? This is not just something that they did over a weekend. And very smart people concluded that this was an appropriate price. I mean, WME-IMG, these are juggernauts. They didn't get to where they are just out of luck. So to me, it also suggests, as I said earlier, these fighters are worth more. To me, it suggests that the UFC is killing it. The UFC is a profitable, successful, healthy brand, and they view it can go a lot greater than what it is today. So that to me is the other thing, because you're right, we don't know, we truly don't know how much Brock Lesnar will make on Saturday night, because we don't know what the pay-per-views are. We don't know. They said 2.5. It's way more than 2.5. You think Brock Lesnar came back to the UFC for 2.5? You are kidding yourself. So we don't know the answers to these questions. So to me, it's like this is the first time that an actual number has been somewhat attached to the UFC, and we know that this. Now the UFC hasn't come out like in their press release. They didn't release the financial terms. But to me, this is the first time since 2001 where there's a number attached to this promotion. Now let me ask you this, Luke: was this the right time to sell? So I ask you, like, okay, does the number surprise you? We can debate this, and we'll never truly know because we don't know those financials. Unless they go public, we'll never know. But given where the sport is, where it came, everyone talks about that 2.5 number in 2001. That was a brilliant business move, obviously. Is it possible that this is an even smarter business move by the Fertittas to get out now when you can get this kind of money, when you have these kinds of stars under the roster, especially when you consider the other things that are sort of hanging in the ether that they may have to deal with in the future?
I think if there's one thing you can say about the Fertittas and their business is that, one, they're long-lasting, right? They find ways to create and assume more wealth, but that's sort of a general way of abstraction. I think more than that, they have really good timing, don't they?
Yeah.
Not just in their MMA business, in their casino business. Look at their Red Rocks going public. They made hundreds of millions of dollars, 2 months ago, just on the way in which they redid their Red Rocks IPO. I mean, it's shocking how good they are at finding ways to creatively stay in business, expand business, and then time decisions around certain market conditions. And I feel like they just have a really good spidey sense. To your point, Aliak potential, concussion research potential. Who knows?
USADA ruining their plans.
Who knows? I'm certain that if they were somehow forced to stick on, they would still soldier forward and find ways to grow the brand. But they also probably, it seems to me that this is mostly a Fertitta thing, I feel like. If Dana's staying on, he's not party to it. I mean, he's party to it by virtue of selling and rebuying.
Sure.
But Fertitta's also, it seems like to me, they have other interests.
Yeah.
And now's the time to act on those. They're not getting any younger. This is a great amount of wealth to generate if you're raising funds. Hard to see how this is a bad one.
Yeah, they just purchased the Palms as well in Las Vegas.
Right, and they also, if I'm not mistaken, they own the land on which a potential football stadium would be built if Las Vegas could draw the Raiders over there. So yeah, I mean these guys know how to make money.
Oh.
Do you see a lot of growth here? Do you think that the UFC can get a whole lot bigger than it is today?
I think so. I mean, the UFC still and MMA still somewhat very niche. People are not 100% educated on it and don't know much about it. So there is a lot of room to grow and become a mainstream sport.
I think it's niche-y. I think it's probably topped out here, right? Like, I'm not saying it can't get bigger, but it would take a bigger star than Ronda Rousey to do it. Hard to imagine MMA producing one of those. Now, again, I'm sure it will happen eventually at some point. Are we going to be alive to see it? I don't know. But definitely Latin America, Southeast Asia.
And also, when you think about the fact that smart business people plunk down $4 billion, they're not doing that in hopes that maybe they can, keep it at $4 billion and not lose money. They're looking at it as something that they can grow, that they can double, they can triple. hard to fathom that. It's hard to imagine that if, this is a $4 billion property, but it is a whole sport. And I know we've made those comparisons to the Cowboys or the Real.
Well, let's talk about that.
Real is not all of world soccer. I hate to tell you this, Luke, because there's another team in Barcelona that's actually better. But
really? Who's the champions of Europe?
I thought Atletico.
Ala Madrid. Yeah, not the champions of Europe. Sorry.
And the Dallas Cowboys, for all of the stars you see on people's paraphernalia all over the place in this country, they're not the whole of professional football. But UFC is not the whole of MMA, but it is essentially the whole of high-level MMA or close to it. And so the growth potential is wholly within their grasp.
Yeah.
And these guys, these smart people, have figured out that there's something more they can get out of it.
Okay, let us talk about that, because when I tweeted this link to the Forbes article saying, okay, Forbes, of all the sports franchises in the world, Forbes says that there's only one, the Dallas Cowboys, that is worth the same amount as the UFC right now. Now, of course, if Jerry Jones decides to sell the Cowboys, he could get $7 billion. I mean, just because Forbes says something, but I thought it was interesting because everyone on that list was less than $4 billion. A lot of responses were, well, you're comparing the UFC to the wrong thing. You should be comparing it to the NFL, the NBA, the NHL. And to that I say, that's ridiculous.
Why would you do that?
The NFL is an organization, a league comprised of 32 independent ownership groups. The UFC is one ownership group. Now, there may be multiple people within that group, but it's one ownership group. And I can see that it is not apples to apples. Right. Perhaps comparing the UFC to WWE is a little more, equal, but
or NASCAR. I mean, I don't even know NASCAR is even that's separate
that feels
businesses as
yes.
well.
But to me, if Forbes is saying that the Cowboys are worth $4 billion and the Knicks and the Lakers and Real Madrid and Barcelona are worth less than that, it just doesn't equal up. It does not equal up. I don't understand how the UFC, with all due respect to this great sport that I love, can be in that discussion. Number-wise, I don't understand if you have $4 billion in your pocket and you say, should I buy this or this, that these two things are the same, that they're worth the same amount of money. I know they're somewhat different entities, but they are not worth the same because, like I said, young kids are wearing these jerseys. If you buy the Cowboys, you're buying the history of the Cowboys. You're buying the brand. You're buying you're buying all that.
And you're buying into the NFL. So you're buying, what are they, $4 billion? So you're buying this $4 billion thing that's part of a bigger.
Yes.
I know that I agree with you. You can't say, well, compare the UFC to the NFL. But if you do take the whole of the NFL, the value of all those franchises, you're going to get many, many, many billion. And by buying the Cowboys, you are buying into that, in a sense, differently. If you buy the UFC, you are buying the UFC. You're buying the leading entity in mixed martial arts, but you're not buying some kind of larger. You're not really buying into some larger thing.
The responses blew me away.
What did you hear?
You're an idiot. You're comparing it to the wrong thing. You should be comparing the UFC to the NFL.
And to ascertain what?
What do you mean?
What meaningful conclusion could someone draw out of that?
Well, they're saying that here I am defending these crazy responses, but people are saying to me, you are comparing a league to a team. The UFC is a company. The Cowboys aren't a company. No, actually, the Cowboys are a company.
Yeah, no, you're not comparing a league to a team. You're comparing a property to a property.
Yeah.
Right. One property is in a league, one property is not.
So when you see these numbers, do you not come away with the same thing? Like how are these two things
first
on
of all,
the
I think
same
if Real Madrid got sold, or to that point, who's number 3? I don't know, Lakers or something, whatever.
Yeah.
I think they would go for more than $4 billion. I truly do. Like, if you consider someone like Real Madrid, like, where was their summer tour last summer? It was in China. Like, the rights to get La Liga over there, or just Real Madrid and Barcelona games, is extraordinarily expensive and only going up, not merely in Spain, but of course all over Europe and Southeast Asia and America as well, right? Wait till Real Madrid and Barcelona are off beIN Sport and are on Fox and NBC. Anyway, long story short, so soccer is already a worldwide sport. Now you can take this property worldwide in a globalized age, but I just think what you're sort of coming up with is, like, I think that $4 billion figure is part of the Fertitta saying, okay, this is slightly an abstract number of projected value. Like, we're going to charge you more than what it probably is because you can get your money back because we're going to project its wealth in 5 years to be roughly more like this. In other words, it's not really like if they distilled all the assets down to a concrete number, it'd probably be less than that. But they're bumping it up in ways that A, is good for their image, but more is a lean forward into what it's basically going to be.
Of course, I don't think it's actually worth that. I also think that the UFC, when you compare it to these other sports, is a hell of a lot more volatile and a bigger risk.
That's the other part.
God forbid, one major injury, one short. Like I said earlier, things can change drastically.
But
in
real
the
quickly,
sport.
this needs to be articulated because we're riding high right now, and that's good. Everyone should be doing the best work. They should be having the most fun. This will not last. This sport is inherently going to do this.
Cyclical, yeah.
In more ways than football or baseball might. Those leagues, to your point, because there are so many entities, they buoy themselves one way or the other. They have down years, they have up years, but it's basically balanced. Fight sports are prone to boom and bust. We will hit a bust period eventually.
How do you feel about this, Danny?
I think I agree with that, and I think we're starting to see that. Obviously, the sport is at an all-time high, and that's due because of mainly Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor.
Right.
Who knows if Ronda Rousey is going to return? And Conor McGregor just came off a loss against Nate Diaz and is fighting again. If he loses again, I mean, you can bet he's going to lose some momentum as well. So those stars are sort of, on the come down. So we may experience, a low in that area. So I do think it was the perfect time for the Fertittas to sell the UFC.
Let's not forget 2 years ago, injuries, fight cancellations. They had a very weak financial year. Last year, they had a tremendous, according to Lorenzo Fertitta, their best one ever. So that's, you obviously have to sell high.
But
things can
as,
go up and down.
Luke's pointing out Real, which is an example of a team that is having much success now, but number one team, the Cowboys, with that franchise, is that one of the five best football teams in the
No.
NFL? No. Is it one of the 10 best football teams in the NFL? No.
Right. So it's the worst.
Is it maybe, it's probably between 10 and 20. I would say
that
it's
goes
somewhere
back to my point. That
it's
just
been
backs
that
up
way
my
for
point.
it's been that way for
because
20
it's
years.
a brand that it means something to people, that kids grow up and fathers are telling their sons about Roger Staubach.
But I was a kid.
Losers are telling their kids.
Did you get my point?
I was a kid the last time the Cowboys were really relevant as a team.
Yes.
As a team.
Yes.
This is, the entire generation has grown up with them being worth nothing, and yet $4 billion. So I think that's where that entity can withstand the ups and downs. I think something like the UFC, as Luke points out, I agree with you that it's a little bit more volatile because something bad happens in the UFC. A lot falls apart.
And also,
really
if you're
fast.
a part of the NFL or the NBA, you have a commissioner who is. A couple of years ago, there was a situation in New Orleans with the Hornets, who are now the Pelicans, and they could not find an owner. They were ownerless. And the NBA worked very hard to find them an owner, to the point where the New Orleans Saints owner, the Benson family, came in and bought them. They will find a home for these franchises. They will work for you. There's no one doing that for the UFC, right? You're kind of left to figure things out on your own. And so, yes, again, I will concede, and I know people are going to say apples to oranges. But when you try to compare sports to sports and this situation to that situation and find the links, there are many links between the two. And to me, it just sort of blows my mind.
This is what people can't wrap their head around. A property can also be a sport. Mm-hmm. A property can also be a team. Right? That's why it is so consequential if Ronda Rousey or Conor McGregor goes away, because you're buying a sports property that happens to be the majority of the sport, but that's it. The idea that you should compare the UFC to the NFL is only something that people who think Pokemon Go is a proper use of time would suggest, which means their opinion is utterly irrelevant.
Danny, let me ask you about this. How about the timing of this announcement? This has been rumored for quite some time, and of course the UFC could dictate when the news came out because the reporting had somewhat stopped, and we're all trying to figure out when it was going to come out. Everyone knew that it was inevitable and that they were in discussions, but the timing I found to be very interesting. Sunday night, 24 hours after UFC 200, this milestone event for the UFC, essentially the first tweet is from a local Las Vegas news channel saying that we have this interview with Lorenzo Fertitta and Dana White. And I like the symbolism there. Here's Lorenzo Fertitta giving back to the community, a Las Vegas guy. He goes to a Las Vegas local news channel to make the first public statement. Then you see the New York Times jumping on board. Monday morning, we get a press release, and that's pretty much it. I mean, this is a massive story. This is a massive deal. And it's broken on a local Las Vegas CBS affiliate 24 hours after 200. Are you surprised that they went this route?
Well, yes and no. I would say no because, they are riding that wave where everybody's talking about UFC and UFC 200, plus all the news that came out of it for Jon Jones, Brock Lesnar, etc. So, they are in the conversation. So when they announce, the UFC's on sale, that's in people's minds. I am interested about why they chose to announce it to a local station. That is very interesting. They could have, I'm sure New York Times would have loved to pick up that story and been able to break it, or any other major publication. So that is the interesting part about that.
But to happen,
but it's,
didn't it take all the, like Monday morning when I did my show, I had to start with the sale. I'm not talking UFC 200. If you wait a week, now it's a big story.
I suppose that's
or a bigger story.
That's a reasonable point. But I thought that, to jump off of Danny's point here, they brought it to this local station. That was a way to control the narrative. And if we know nothing else about the UFC, the UFC likes to control the narrative. You certainly would know that more than anybody. This story, the sale story, was reported prior to UFC 200. Our friend Jeremy Botter of Flow Combat, he reported it and was, I did not put the quotation marks next to my words, okay? He reported it and was vehemently denied. And other rumors or reports have all been denied. And other stories, like stuff that you got involved with the UFC, it's all about the same thing, which is we want to control the narrative. We want to be the ones that, when the story is going to be reported, we want to be the ones that control how it gets reported. And how better to do that than to give it to your local affiliate?
I'm sure there were a few national outlets that would let them control it now. We have seen that.
Certainly, it would have been a feather in the cap for your for the company that's for Fox, the company that gave them all the money for this big TV deal. But
I didn't even think of Fox, but that's a great point. I wonder what they thought about the whole thing.
Geez, I just thought about that too. Wow, that's kind of funny. I have a theory about it.
Okay.
So Janet Yellen or Bernanke or Alan Greenspan, right, when they're in their duties as the head of the Fed, when they go and they speak, they have to be very careful about what they say, because even the slightest intonation on a word or the way something is articulated, the markets will go crazy, right? And they have to be relatively honest, but they have to be very calm and even keeled about it. And number one, the deal's not done. And it may not be done. I mean, it's all likelihood it will, but it is not done. And number two, the reason why Greenspan or Bernanke or Yellen won't say things that are outlandish is not merely to rattle the markets to keep them calm, but to project an image of stability. And I think that's what they were doing. They did not want people to think, here's new owners, oh my God, UFC fans should panic because major change is coming. There's a new dawn upon us. I think what they wanted to say was, there's new owners, the train rolls on. Right?
That's a great point.
And there might be one, because I tried to reach out to Wade Morris and Denver, and they were very friendly, but they're like, until the deal is completed, we are not talking. So what I want to see is, once the deal is completed, then do we get that press call where we get to ask everyone questions about image and direction.
Yeah, that is a great point. To that point, the UFC held sort of a company-wide meeting Monday afternoon. Lorenzo Fertitta, Dana White spoke. I was told it lasted 15, 20 minutes. Everyone was there. Few questions were asked, 3 or 4, and that was essentially it. The new owners weren't there, and it was pretty much like, okay, this is what's happening, and if you got any questions, speak up. But I don't think there were a lot of people who had questions because there's just so many unknowns, and I don't even know if
also at that point
Lorenzo.
It's too late.
Yeah, I mean he's now the former owner or soon to be former owner. So then let me ask you about this, Jeff. You're the elder statesman here. You have a lot of experience. No, but this is an honest question. UFC 200 Fight Week just ended. International Fight Week. 3 straight days of shows. Insanity. Jon Jones, this and that. You have to imagine that the crew at the UFC were working insane hours, right?
Right.
200 ends Saturday. You're just coming down. You probably want to take a day off on Monday. Monday morning, you wake up to the news that there are new owners. And business as usual, we know what that term means in mixed martial arts, right? It means the exact opposite more often than not. More to my point about the timing. Should they have waited a week or so to let these people come down from the hard work that they just put into the company a week ago? And by the way, worth noting, most of these people do not have a stake in the company. So it's not like they're celebrating as well. Yeah, we just sold for $4 billion, I'm gonna get 1%. That's not happening.
My sense is that these decisions are made at a level higher than all these folks, and then they become the spillover of whatever the news happens to be. The decision to make this public was made for reasons that are beyond those people. So, they wanted to be sensitive to their workers. They wanted to have that meeting. It doesn't surprise me that it would have been a 15-minute meeting because, I've been in places where, I've been in a magazine that was shutting down, and one minute I literally was sitting at my desk writing a headline for a story, and then the next minute I got an email saying, come to the conference room, and everybody was there, and we were shut down, and I didn't have to even finish that headline that I just was sitting working on. So these kinds of things happen in the business world very suddenly, and it's not always. It doesn't always happen at a convenient time for everybody. It happens when it's going to happen, and everybody either gets treated like dirt, or they get treated with some respect. And it seems to me that if you have a meeting with your coworkers, you're giving them at least some respect to try to give them an explanation of what's been going on.
Yeah.
And I just want to quickly add, not only did they have like a crazy weekend and they had to like wake up to those news, but just a few days later they had to return back to work for UFC Fight Night 91.
Yeah. There's a Wednesday show. There's one in a week and a half in Chicago. I feel for those people though. Those people work very, very hard. And I know some of them feel like they are underappreciated and underpaid, and some of them are paid very well. But you got to feel for those people who are now left with a lot of uncertainty, because we don't know if the new owners are going to come in and clean house. And that brings me to my next point. It comes out that Dana White is sticking around. Lorenzo Fertitta is leaving. Dana White has told us time and again that if Lorenzo and Frank leave, he is leaving as well. Do you think something has changed? Did they give him a deal he couldn't refuse? Or is it possible that this 5-year deal that was reported by Darren Rovell of ESPN is really maybe a 1 or 2 year deal with a couple more years of a non-compete? Because you have to expect, an owner comes in, they don't want to be seen as the one who is cleaning house, because then everyone's going to hate him. They don't want to be seen as the one who got rid of Dana White, the public face of the UFC, Joe Rogan, other things. And B, you don't want to buy the UFC and have Dana White start his own organization, because that would be very dangerous. So what do you make of this decision to have Dana White stick around, and Dana's decision to stick around as well, when he always told us that he wasn't going to stick around if they left?
Are the Fertittas like tiny minority owners?
Yeah, but they're silent.
Oh,
so
that's
they have
right.
no say.
They have no say, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of like a almost ceremonial in terms of their overall wealth, not much. I guess I'm not surprised that Dana stuck around. I mean, hashtag Dana says. Dana says lots of things, most of which is not worth taking seriously. Either because he's in a promoter role and he's not telling you the truth because that's his role, or because he's Dana. So the fact that he, from the outside looking in, changed his mind, that maybe he was going to do this all along. I don't really know, but that the new owners kept him around, to me, is not surprising. Certainly I have a different worldview than he does, but I don't think there would be a better person, at least from a transition standpoint, to take them from one stage to the next. You got to have someone in there. I mean, look, for all his faults and all his successes, one thing you can say unequivocally, he is definitely not pretending to be a fight fan, and he is definitely not confused about how the fight game works. And I think that is really critical in any kind of ownership change, that someone at the head can do that. I don't know if he'll last more than 5 years or 10 or whatever, but that he is here, to me, is entirely unsurprising.
Yeah, and what one of his greatest attributes, I would say, is his ability to perform in a volatile circumstance. And what could be more volatile than when the entire company has been sold? I mean, look at last week. All of a sudden, he loses his main event guy, and somehow manages to keep the ship going to the point where they replace that guy with maybe the one fighter who people would claim is the greater all-time mixed martial artist. Certainly wasn't going to be as good a fight as it would have been with Jon Jones versus Cormier, but still he was able to adapt, and that's something that we've seen from Dana White throughout his tenure with the UFC. He's always able to get things through choppy waters and react quickly. And this is a time when there's a lot of things that are uncertain, as you pointed out. And you don't want to start from scratch with some brand new person. I'd be shocked to see him at the helm after more than a couple of years, if not sooner. I mean, I think one thing I will say is that some of the things that he gets in trouble with, or the things that we think he should be getting in trouble with, some of the things he says and does, including the stuff that went on with you, that stuff's not going to go on anymore. That stuff is, I think that ship has sailed. He's not going to be able to rule the sport with this kind of dictatorship, this kind of this attitude that he just makes up the rules as he goes along. I don't think that's going to fly much longer.
Final note on this sale topic before we have to move along. In my opinion, no one's buying the UFC or anything for $4 billion just to keep it status quo. They have grander visions of doing a whole lot more with it. Look into your crystal ball. In 5 years, is the UFC a drastically different promotion organization? Do you see a lot of changes coming, whether on the surface, behind the scenes, the structure? Do you foresee that, or do you think it's going to be a longer haul?
I think it's going to be a longer period of time. The UFC is already a successful business, and they've been running things very well, and that's why they're the top organization. So I don't see any major changes. Also, I don't think people react very well to abrupt changes. Yeah. So they're going to try to make those changes through a long period of time, and I think that's just going to come slowly.
If there's one thing I learned about UFC fans, by the way, they are a creature of habit. I mean, Face the Pain outlasted the Fertittas, and they're happy about that.
and that's kind of that Face the Pain is kind of a great symbol of the kind of off-brand way that the UFC has existed, and that would be the thing that I would be looking to see happen. I mean, they've always been sort of attaching themselves to the off-brands. I mean, they're apparel deal, Reebok. It's not with one of the big, the big two. They're attached to Fox. They're not with the, with the bigger entity. They're attached to, I mean, you can go down the line, and almost everything that
Mickey's Malt Liquor.
Don't you dare slander Mickey's Malt.
And they haven't gotten that Dave & Buster's deal that they were hoping to get.
Well, partly they don't have like Acura. You know what I mean?
Fair enough.
Even MLS has Audi.
Okay, let's move along to UFC 200 again. Like the sales story, we've had a few days to take it all in. You were there. You guys were watching from some undisclosed location.
A bunker.
What's the big takeaway? Let me start with you, Danny. What's the big... If you view UFC 200 as sort of the Super Bowl of the year, the midway point, the WrestleMania, if you will, if you view it as this massive event where if you're having any massive event, there's going to be massive repercussions post-event, what's the big story to watch post-200 in your opinion?
I think we'll see if there's going to be a Brock Lesnar era or not. Part 2. Brock Lesnar didn't say he was going to come back. He looked like he wanted to come back, but I'm sure there's some little details that need to be talked about. So I think that's the bigger question. And he's a huge draw. And the UFC heavyweight division can drastically change if he decides to keep on fighting and have a UFC career.
Do you think he comes back?
I think so. He looked like he wanted to come back. He had a great performance. He felt good about his performance as well. He was very happy about it. I think he comes back.
Who do you book him against?
It depends. The UFC has two options. They can either probably, if they want to get him to the title route very fast, they could probably match him up with Cain Velasquez. So that would be a huge fight, and then the winner takes, fights for the title. Or if they want to build them up, maybe I would like to see him take the winner of Barnett versus Arlovsky and sort of just, build his star power up a little bit, and his confidence back and build up his record a little more.
That, to me, seems like a guy who doesn't need a boost of confidence. But I get what you're saying. I definitely get what what do you think? What do you think about what he said about Brock Lesnar?
I think that it's. I am kind of in the 50-50 about whether Lesnar is going to be. In the aftermath of that win, all I saw on social media was, well, now that sews it up. He's going to come back. And what I saw was a guy in the aftermath who felt as though he had answered some questions about himself, and that could be, I come back, I did it, and he also struggled through that fight. It was not an easy thing, and maybe he came back, he did it, and he rides off into the sunset a happier guy than the last time after he got knocked out 2 straight fights and left. So I could see him riding off into the sunset, but I think this is the takeaway that I have on this fight card as a whole. We watch fights because they answer questions. This guy's fighting this guy. And the answer is, who's the better fighter? The answer comes in the fight. But I feel like UFC 200, the aftermath is more questions than answers. And I think that the Brock Lesnar one is certainly a great example. The women's bantamweight championship, there's a question mark over is there somebody who really rules that division, right? Amanda Nunes is the champion, but a few days ago it was Miesha Tate, and then before that it was Holly Holm, and before that it was Ronda Rousey forever. It's a whole new era, and is that going to be the new way that we're going to experience that? And you can go right down the line all through that card. I feel like there are more questions coming out of it.
Perhaps new questions.
New questions, new questions. But those were the things that I really took out of it, more so than answers. I got a few small answers, but a lot of it was questions.
Let me ask you this before you weigh in on your big takeaway. If you're the McMahon family, and I know you watched Raw on Monday, and if you're the McMahon family, Is this good for you? Is this good for your business? Of course, Brock Lesnar sort of in many people's minds equals WWE, but I will be honest, I didn't watch Raw on Monday, but from what I'm told, they didn't make that big of a deal about it, and I'm surprised. I'm surprised that they didn't gloat and puff their chests out that their guy went into that world and beat up the real guys. So if you're the McMahons, are you happy about this, or are you going to try to do everything in your power to stop him from going back? Is this good for business?
This is a tough question for me to answer because I don't really understand the other side of the business. But
if you have a guy who is the face of your company going into the real world and proving that he is the ultimate badass,
the face, though? Is he the face of wrestling?
Without a doubt,
Yes.
one of the top 3 biggest draws. Him, John Cena. I mean, you don't need to be an expert to know that he's a big deal.
So it sounds to me like they don't want to get too high or too low about it. If he wins, great, but I think they want to be insulated in case he loses too. So if they came out and I guess if they puffed their chest up when he won, they wouldn't necessarily have to acknowledge it when he lost. But I think they want to make a precedent of making a nod at it and then moving along, because they realize that like he could probably beat the top. I should say the bottom 5 of the top 10, but not people beyond that.
But they have a lot invested in this guy. If he goes to the real world, gets his head knocked off, and is out, for 6 months due to a concussion, that's a loss for them. And he was doing something outside of WWE, and they can't capitalize on it. So to me, I would feel a little bit uneasy about it. Yes, it's good for us because people equate him with our brand, but they were probably pretty nervous on Saturday night, right?
I'm sure they were. But on the whole, the way things are playing out, I don't know how they could be upset about it.
Sure. Okay, what's your takeaway?
Well, I guess the takeaway for me is it's sort of twofold. It's the same one, but the way in which you have to think about it. One, like what is going to happen to Jon Jones? We always, and I mentioned this. I said this on my live chat on Wednesday. I'm going to repeat it because I just feel like it's essential. When he came back the first time, he was going to come back, and we were like, "Yay, Jon Jones is back!"
Which time are we talking?
This was after he got probation.
Because you're not talking cocaine. You're not talking.
Honestly, at this point, I really can't remember.
Okay.
I honestly can't keep all his.
Because there were multiple comebacks.
But I had a discussion, and people got kind of angry at me. I was like, either he is going to fix this, or he is not going to fix this. And I don't really know. And I don't think cheerleading him is going to help. Okay, I am more convinced than ever that we keep having this discussion like John's going to get it together, or why won't he make the choice to do it? And I'm really wondering, can he? Does he really have what it takes to make those kinds of life choices? Because the things I hear is like it could still definitely get worse for him in terms of him managing his life. Like the idea that he is like completely fixed it. I mean, I'm not there. I can only I can only synthesize the information that gets sent my way, but I don't have a lot of confidence that this is the last he's even going to be in trouble, to be quite honest. Like, we keep looking at him like he's a successful person who just keeps veering. And what I wonder is he's a guy who naturally messes up, who we didn't notice that because he's so athletic and it took him to these heights, when in fact now you're seeing his inability to manage his life. That's kind of who he is, I think. I don't really know that he's ever going to fix this, to be honest. And that's sort of a scary thing, because not only is that going to affect him, and that's its whole issue, what's going to happen to Daniel Cormier's career? If he never gets the chance to fight Jones again but wins them all, where does he rank? What does that do? It will forever be the scarlet letter that he can't really ever address, which is, I mean, I mentioned this to Daniel myself. I had him on my show. You had him on your show.
Yeah.
This is the only sport where you need your hated rival to be your partner. They have to be. We are in lockstep together, and he can't get Jones to do that. And he had his own injury too. But I really wonder what's going to happen to those two in the division itself.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the thing about Jones, though, is this was the first time that it was directly fighting related, I guess. All the other stuff was all personal life, and it spilled out into, it had implications for his fighting career, but it was all things that he was doing in his personal life. The car thing, the cocaine was a mistake. That was something that should not have even been revealed, because that is not a
sure.
A
but let's just, you're a target for these things, right?
Of course. But these were all things that were not fight related until they made him. Yeah. They pulled him away from the fight. This was the first time that it was directly connected to a fight. And it's almost as though he has taken his troubles to a whole other level. Now, I'm not going to say that what he did before this fight that got this fight canceled was more severe than having a hit and run that injures a pregnant woman. That's, there's no comparison there. But in terms of his fighting career, this is the one that is going to stain him forever. All that other stuff, made him look like a very troubled guy with a personal life that had problems. This is something, when you have PEDs, you get stained. Although, hey, the guy who replaced them just came back from a PED suspension.
I disagree with the forever word, because Anderson Silva was kneeling down in the middle of the octagon when good guy Daniel Cormier just fought his ass off and took a fight on 2 days' notice and is being showered with booze, and Anderson Silva is being made as the savior. And also, let's not forget, Jon Jones injured a pregnant woman, ran away from the scene of the crime, or the scene of the accident, I should say, and has been showered with praise upon returning. And again, Cormier being showered with booze. As long as you can fight and people are excited to see you, I bet most of the people out there would welcome him with open arms. They are not gonna, they're not gonna view this as a stain on his career. We may think that. It may take some time.
It's a stain whether it's acknowledged by the nearsighted fan base or not. It's still a stain.
I agree with you, but I don't know if the fans view it that way. You know what I'm saying? I don't think you'll have a hard time. People love.
It's not just MMA. I mean, look, Ray Lewis got cheered after, in Baltimore. You can just go down the list of all the athletes who have done horrible things and then became heroes again.
Let me ask you about a comment that Luke just made, and I agreed with it up until Saturday night. Daniel Cormier needed Jon Jones. He needs Jon Jones. He needs to beat Jon Jones in order to really be, the light heavyweight champion. I don't feel like that's the case anymore. I feel like enough things have happened to where I view Jon. I will admit, love Daniel. I didn't view him as the real light heavyweight champion. Now I do. Now I think that he has withstood enough. He has been through enough. There's been enough things that have happened to where this man is the light heavyweight champion and he has earned that right. Do you view it that way? Because I could see why you wouldn't. Do you view it that way?
I do. I agree. I think he is the light heavyweight champion. I mean, he's got the belt.
Yes.
But I don't necessarily agree that he may be the very best light heavyweight out there. Jon Jones has a win over him, and I feel like for him to solidify that and say, I am the best light heavyweight out there, he needs to beat Jon Jones. And until that point, I don't think, he can.
But how long can we penalize him for? If Jones isn't around.
Well, just the fact that Jon Jones has a win over him.
Sure.
And not only just a win, but the fact that Jon Jones has this amazing record. That's always going to be a question.
I mean, I'm not to put words in your mouth, Luke, but I got the feeling you were talking more about Daniel Cormier's legacy, his lingering legacy, and that's a whole other issue. Yeah, I mean, if you lost to Jones and then you never had a chance to redeem yourself, sure, that's going to affect your legacy, but Jon Jones
does it affect his legacy, really?
Well, to some extent, sure, of course.
His coach admitted it to me. It does.
Yeah, I know, but in the moment, yes, but Jon has disqualified himself. So how can it?
That's about now. That's about right now. Jon Jones is dead to the sport, at least now. If Jon Jones.
When I think of Daniel Cormier's legacy, I don't think this guy never got to avenge loss. It would be nice. It would be a great story, but he has done enough, in my opinion, to be viewed as one of the all-time greats. No, 100%. The short notice Grand Prix stuff, moving down to light heavyweight, defeating Gustafsson in Rumble and beating Frank Mir. He's done enough.
Why is it different today than it was a week ago today?
Because if there is a PED issue attached to this suspension, then things change.
So then
that's the reason why when people say Anderson Silva is the GOAT, when people say Anderson Silva is the GOAT, I cringe inside. You can't be the GOAT if you fail the PED test. And if Jon Jones failed the PED test, I rethink my stance on who is the GOAT.
So does 100%. but relating it to Cormier, are you then questioning Jones's victory over Cormier and saying it's less valuable because there's a guy who ended up popping for PEDs?
I don't take anything away from that because he passed all the tests before that. It makes me view everything differently. It makes me and I don't feel like Cormier needs to do this, and that to gain that respect. I did before this happened. I said he needs this fight more than Jones needs this fight because he's the one who lost. But I just view things a little differently now. And maybe that's too hard of a stance. Maybe that's too black and white when it comes to PEDs. And maybe that's an idealistic view of the way things.
So. I mean, I agree with you when we're thinking about the sport right now because Jones is not there. Jones is, and who knows if he probably will not come back if he gets a 2-year suspension in time for Cormier's career, to intersect with his.
You never know.
I mean, Cormier has said, in fact, he said on the Luke Thomas show, if I'm not mistaken, that he does not expect to be fighting after age 40. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I mean, how many fighters have said that, though, and not
I listened to your show.
Okay, but he's slowing down.
Yeah,
you
I know.
can see it,
I mean, he's still looking pretty damn good out there.
Okay, that's how good he,
Sure.
in his prime, athletic prime anyway, he was. This is a decline from that. It just so happens that he's so far ahead of everyone else that decline is still viability.
Let me ask you about the roll of the dice to put Amanda Nunes in there as opposed to Holly Holm.
Oof.
Did that backfire on them? Because,
Big time.
Okay, well, Nunes has some things going for her. I mean, the story that she's the first openly gay fighter, she'll open up some doors.
There was no headlines about that on Monday.
Fair enough. Holm, Tate, winner has a story with Ronda Rousey. She will draw them back. Does Nunes not draw Ronda back? Or is it possible that Ronda's like, hey, wait, maybe this is the easiest of all the scenarios and this will get me back? What do you think?
This is the only call I think they made in that whole weekend I just didn't like. I mean,
Okay.
UFC deserves a lot of credit. I thought they built 3 good cards.
Tremendous.
And, look, some worked out better than others. The one last night, for some reason, was a barn burner. That's just how it goes. So in fact, I'm not bagging on the fight, although the fight itself was entertaining, but that it felt like anticlimactic as a headliner. I'm not bagging on it in that way. What I am saying is you always want to keep, what makes the UFC great? 2 things. One, it's that they put on the fights that people want to pay money to see. And 2, that also, in general, the best fight the best. That's basically their 2 most outstanding virtues, okay? You got a case here of the best fighting the best, but what you didn't get was the fight that people want to pay money to see. That did not feel like a headlining fight to me. Moreover, it doesn't really do you a lot of good when you bring Rousey back. Look, if you bring Rousey back, her comeback story is pretty big already.
Yeah.
But she should have had a hook. I mean, you just lost something big with, you had 2 choices. You could have had either, now you have neither. To me, that was the only misjudgment that they made. You want to keep fresh blood moving, but not at the expense of existing star power when you can handle it. And this, to me, was a bad call.
Maybe this buys her some time. Maybe they have Nunes fight Juliana Pena. If Juliana Pena can win, she has a bit of a history with Ronda Rousey.
Not the same.
It's not the same. No, I agree.
No, it's not. But I also think that I don't think that Nunes is the easiest fight for Rousey to return.
Sure,
she's a striker. She's an aggressive striker. Ronda Rousey is that's not her strength. She would, if the easiest fight for Ronda Rousey was Miesha Tate because she's beaten her twice, and that's the fight she. This is a woman who has not fought since she lost, and all assumptions we haven't heard from her to say it, but all assumptions are it's because of her confidence. And where could you derive more confidence than in being matched against somebody you've beaten twice? So I agree with that it was the matchup certainly robbed the UFC of certain storylines. But the ball has to keep rolling, and they weren't willing to give Holly Holm a rematch, which I don't think it necessarily was deserved. And they
Crazy talk. She was winning the entire fight.
But she's most deserving.
She was a champion who never defended her belt.
Yeah, I know, but
but
also when you consider the Ronda Rousey factor, Holm versus Tate is the safe fight because she has a history with both people. This is what we're.
Sure,
when Ronda Rousey's gonna come back.
Right. Well, that's the other thing.
From a business perspective, you're right. But I'm talking about from a where do you merit a rematch? Fighters champions who have a belt and never defend it, lose it in their first defense. I don't believe that they deserve a rematch necessarily. The long reigning champions. That's why Rousey not only deserves a rematch, or not only deserves a title fight because she's a huge star, but also deserves because she reigned for a long time.
We're talking about an era where Dan Henderson's about to get a title shot. We can't talk about deserved in the UFC in 2016.
Also, if Anderson Silva got knocked out against Chris Weidman, that's not a cause for rematch, but his tenure is.
Right.
But if you have no tenure and you're really close, which that one was, to me that would be a case where, real quickly, because I know Danny hasn't weighed in yet. It's not merely that they put Nunes, I can never pronounce her last name correctly, against Tate. You've got Shevchenko going up against Holm next weekend. Okay, newsflash. Shevchenko is a super live dog in that fight.
Yes.
And if she wins, you're going to have a rematch for the title potentially between Shevchenko and Nunes. What? I mean, you could always plug in Pena because she had a big win against Kat. Okay, that's not like you have to go that direction, but it's like you are pushing out people with huge. Holm and Tate have 2 of the biggest names in the sport, and you're pushing them aside for God bless them, but Shevchenko and Nick, I can't. No.
I agree with you guys, but you guys also need to look at the fact that just being a champion already adds weight to your name. So that's why we have this whole situation has added more players to that division. Before it was the Ronda Rousey show and that's it. Why? Because there was only one champion. But now since there's former champions, just the fact that you can say former champion, it adds weight to those names. So now we have Nunes, we have Tate, we have Pena.
Sure.
We have Rousey. I mean, there's a lot of players, so it makes things interesting in the bantamweight division.
So if you're the UFC, who do you book Nunes? Let's say Holly Holm wins next week, right? Who do you book her against?
That's a tough one. Pena or Holm both are good matchups. I would probably go with Holm because there's a chance there that Holm can beat Nunes, and then if Ronda Rousey does come back, which I do think she'll come back, maybe not this year, but probably next, the timing will be there. And I think Holm will stand a pretty good chance against Nunes, so that's the fight I would make.
You do certainly feel for Pena because she brings up a good point when she says she's 7-0 in the UFC. Those fights in the Ultimate Fighter were...
She's like the Max Holloway of women's.
That's true. Or the Tony Ferguson.
Yeah, I think that she needs to root hard for Shevchenko.
Or the Yoel Romero.
Because if Shevchenko wins that fight next week, I think that's Pena's road to that title shot. But if Holly Holm wins that fight next week, I think that Holly Holm's got to get it because of that factor that they're looking. It's all about Ronda Rousey down the road. It's all like even though she's not wearing the belt and hasn't been seen for many months. She rules that division in from a distance. It's like she's she's like this king that's been deposed and is out in some other country just like ruling quietly because everybody is waiting for her to come back, and the fight they want to see her come back against really is against Holly Holm.
Yeah.
And if that woman is wearing a championship belt, so much the better.
Yeah, that great promo before 200 that they were playing in the arena was amazing. Miesha Tate is the baddest woman on the planet except for Ronda Rousey. And then the whole place starts booing. This was in the promo. This was in the package before the weigh. Were you there for that?
I saw it.
It was unbelievable. And then the whole place caught it and started booing. It was amazing. We are running out of time, but I want to quickly ask you about this. Michael Bisping, Dan Henderson, it is happening. It looks like it's happening in October. Looks like it's happening in England. Now, we've talked about the possibility of this fight a couple weeks ago, but now that it's a reality that they're going in this direction, how do you feel about it?
Hate it.
Hate it.
With understanding this, I actually had Michael on my show yesterday. I talked to him about it. I said this to him.
Okay.
I don't hate Michael Bisping. I certainly don't hate Dan Henderson. Nor do I think the fight will be uninteresting and bad.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that either. But man, you want to talk about throwing the baby out with the bathwater? I mean, what is the point of having rankings if the guy at 13 can just waltz on up to the bar, order a drink, and he gets served first? That to me seems unconscionable. I get it. I understand why they're going to do it. I am not telling you it's not going to be successful, and that's why they're going to do it, because it is probably going to be successful. But rankings. I mean, Jesus, like this is such an egregious indictment of them and how little the UFC cares about them that I don't like it. I don't like the procedure of it.
Before Michael Bisping knocked out Luke Rockhold, up until that moment, seeing Bisping and Henderson would have been perfect.
Sure.
A rematch. I believe it was 7 years ago.
Yes.
So there was 7 years to make that rematch.
Yes.
And it's a great rematch, and I'm looking forward to seeing it for all those reasons. It's a fight that I would like to see, but you can't make that fight for a championship. You might as well take that championship belt and just throw it in a garbage can.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, really, what does it mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Important to
Best fight of that
note.
night.
Important to note that after he knocked out Michael Bisping at UFC 100 7 years ago, Hendo did go to Strikeforce, so he was out of the UFC competition. Okay. Also important to note that Michael Bisping did have plenty of opportunities upon his return to fight him and wasn't campaigning this hard to fight him, which to me is a bit interesting. When you become the champion, that's not the time to be like, all right, I want that guy.
I mean,
it should be a natural, okay, next man up, number one.
In Bisping's defense, his focus was where it should be, on getting to the top.
Sure.
And that was his focus. But still, you're right. But there were plenty of times when he was kind of treading water, and he could have pointed at Dan Henderson and hopefully gotten him.
What do you think?
Well, it's a big fight. That's probably why Michael Bisping wants it. And also, if you look at all the contenders, it's probably the easiest fight. And no offense to Dan Henderson, but if you look at Yoel Romero, Chris Weidman, Luke Rockhold,
how dare you?
It could be a good fight, a good matchup for Michael Bisping, and also considering, Dan Henderson's previous fights, he's only 3-6 in his past 9. I would have liked to see Yoel Romero get the shot. He's in a 7-fight winning streak. Yeah. He's beaten the top guys. He deserved it, and there's beef there, between Michael Bisping and Yoel Romero. So it would have been interesting, yeah. But I can't hate, the Dan Henderson matchup. It is a fantastic story. Dan Henderson has captured belts in Strikeforce, Pride, and really the only belt that he's missing is the UFC belt.
It's going to be interesting if he does win. It could happen. Does he really retire, as he says he's going to? Does he retire as champion?
Mystic Sam Alvey.
Yeah,
Dan
well, he said
Henderson.
60. He said he's going to go when he's 60. What do you do with Yoel?
I mean, I would hate to give him another fight. Mike Brown told me this once after his loss to Steven Seiler, and this has always stayed with me. You can only, every time you fight, you're rolling the dice, and you can only fight for so long before you get caught or something happens. So I wouldn't like to see Yoel Romero get another fight just because, if he loses, then I don't see him getting a shot. And that 7-fight winning streak, all those victories all get thrown out the window.
He's out for a while then. If that fight's happening in October, he's out for a very long. I'd like to see him fight Weidman at MSG. Weidman.
Bisping wants Weidman and Rockhold to rematch.
Yeah, but what? So he gets to pick the 13th guy and pick the rest of the division.
Why not? Why not pick the light heavyweight fight while we're at it?
It's Michael Bisping's world, and we're all living in it. Unbelievable. All right, we have run out of time. Thank you so much for watching. There were a ton more topics to get to this week, but we only have an hour. And, it was a very busy week in the world of MMA. We are back next week.
All
right.
Yeah, we are back.
Are you going to Chicago?
I'm not.
Look at that.
We are back next week.
All right.
We are back next week. This weekend, of course, it was UFC last night. Great show. If you missed it, catch the replay. It was a fantastic event. Really was. Some fantastic fights. This Saturday, of note, Bellator making its England debut. Paul Daly versus Douglas Lima.
Yep.
A couple other interesting names. James Gallagher making his Bellator debut. Matt Mitrione returning as well, so stay tuned for that. But for now, we are out of time. Back next week, like I said. We say goodbye. On behalf of Luke, Jeff, Danny, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the fights.